I watched the ground give way like a wave collapsing in slow motion, and the sound, it wasn't a crack or a rumble. It was a roar, deep and hollow, like the valley itself had decided it had enough. When the dust cleared, 3 luxury cabins were buried under what used to be part of my hillside, the same slope that the HOA president Karen Livingston had ordered her crews to dig out for aesthetic improvement. And there she was, standing at the edge, screaming as the land she stole swallowed everything she'd built. My name's Daniel Whitaker. I've lived in Chestnut Ridge my whole life. Retired from the Army Corps of Engineers after 20 years of building flood control systems and stabilizing hillsides across the country. I thought I'd earned some peace. My property sits right at the base of the ridge, a quiet patch of green with a stream that winds along the edge and a view of the valley that makes you forget about the rest of the world. At least it used to. Things were fine until Karen moved in. You know the type. Polished smile, crisp white linen shirts, sunglasses that never come off, and a voice that carries like she's narrating a commercial. Within months, she became president of the Meadowbrook HOA. She said she wanted to bring order to the community. In reality, she brought control. She rewrote bylaws, turned suggestions into fines, and handed out citations like candy. If you painted your mailbox the wrong shade of brown, she noticed. If your grass grew half an inch too tall, she sent a warning. At first I stayed out of it. I paid my dues, waved politely when she passed by in her white SUV clipboard riding shotgun. I figured she'd burn herself out. But then one morning I heard the sound of machinery, deep engines growling where they didn't belong. I stepped out to see a line of yellow excavators grinding into the ridge. My ridge. I walked up the hill, boots sinking in the loose sand. And there she was, Karen standing like a foreman, shouting instructions to the crew. "Take it down another 6 feet," she said, pointing at the slope that protected my land from runoff. When she saw me, she smiled. "Oh, Daniel. Good morning. Don't worry, it's all approved by the board." "Approved?" I asked. "That's my property line." She lifted her clipboard, tapping a paper with a manicured nail. "It's community land now, rezoned for shared development. We're improving drainage and creating space for luxury cabins. You'll thank us when your property value goes up." My jaw clenched. You can't just rezone land without consent. She gave that slow smirk I'd come to hate. Daniel, consent is implied when you're part of the HOA. That's when I realized she wasn't just power hungry, she was dangerous. I went straight home, pulled out every deed survey and map I had. The line was clear as daylight. Those excavators were digging on my property. I brought it to the next HOA meeting, calm but firm. Karen sat at the head of the table, flanked by her board of loyal yes-men. I spread my documents across the table. "This line," I said, "isn't community land. It's mine." She glanced at the papers like they were a grocery list. "That's an old survey," she said. "Boundaries have shifted with new development plans." I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. "You mean your development plans?" The room went quiet. She leaned back, smile tightening. "If you'd like to contest it, Daniel, you can hire legal counsel. But in the meantime, the project continues. Any attempt to interfere will be documented as obstruction." I walked out before I said something I couldn't take back. The next morning, a notice showed up taped to my door. Non-compliant landscaping, fine $250. Petty, vindictive, predictable. I watched from my porch as the machines tore deeper into the ridge. Every scoop of sand was like a chunk of my patience being hauled away. I took photos, videos, timestamps, everything. But I knew evidence meant nothing if the board was on her side. Days passed, and then came the second letter. Unauthorized slope modification. Fine $600. It was almost funny. They were destroying the slope, but somehow I was the one being fined for it. That night I sat in my study surrounded by paperwork, the glow of the desk lamp casting long shadows across the maps. I felt this wave of exhaustion hit me. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe I should just pay the fines and let it go. What was I fighting for? A few feet of sand. I poured myself a drink, stared at the survey lines, and thought about calling my lawyer. Then didn't. But then I heard it. Rachel, my late wife's wind chime outside, faint in the breeze. She used to say the land was part of our family. It holds us steady, she'd told me once, as long as we respect it. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't about sand, it was about respect. The next morning I called an old colleague, Hank, a geotechnical engineer. He owed me a favor. He came out that afternoon, walked the ridge, and shook his head. "They're cutting into the toe of the slope," he said. "That's the foundation, Dan. Take that out and the whole thing could fail. One good rain and this hillside will move." That sentence stayed with me. One good rain. I sent Hank's report to the HOA. No response. Instead, another fine, unauthorized engineering consultation, $400. I almost laughed. That's when I knew this wasn't incompetence, it was deliberate. A week later, I noticed something odd near the construction site. A young contractor kid, couldn't have been older than 20, left a folder on the hood of his truck while he took a call. The wind flipped it open. Inside were soil reports stamped "Modified." Same date, same author, different conclusions. The original said, "Slope instability risk high." The version they submitted said, "Risk low." I took photos, copies, everything. That night I stayed up building a timeline. Dates, permits, emails, fines, survey scans, all of it. I wasn't just going to complain anymore. I was going to prove what they'd done. And then the weather turned. It started with a drizzle soft enough that no one noticed. Then came 2 days of steady rain. I stood by my window watching the hillside darken the sand, turning slick water streaming down like veins. By the third night, the rain hammered like bullets against the glass. At 2 a.m., I heard it. A low rolling sound like thunder that wouldn't end. I grabbed a flashlight and ran outside. The ridge glowed faintly under the floodlights from the construction site. Then it moved. The entire slope seemed to sigh, then slide. Sand, mud, debris, hundreds of tons of it rushed downhill, swallowing the newly built cabins below. The sound was deafening. When it stopped, the valley was silent except for the hiss of rain. I stood there drenched, staring at what used to be a row of luxury cabins now buried under a river of mud. And standing on the far side, clutching her clipboard, was Karen Livingston, white as chalk, shaking, screaming at the crew. "You told me it was safe." The next morning, the HOA was a war zone. The insurance company sent investigators. County engineers cordoned off the area. When they saw Hank's report, the altered documents, the timeline, I didn't even have to speak. The evidence spoke for itself. At the emergency board meeting, Karen tried to spin it. "No one could have predicted this," she said. "It was an act of God." I stepped forward. "God didn't sign the permits, Karen. You did." The room went dead silent. Cameras from the local news flickered. She looked around for support, but her board members wouldn't meet her eyes. One by one, they resigned. By noon, the county revoked all active HOA construction permits. By evening, the insurance company suspended their coverage pending fraud investigation. Karen's act of God had turned into a man-made disaster with her signature all over it. She tried to disappear, called it medical leave. But word spreads fast in a small town. Everyone knew. The same woman who fined people for mailbox paint had nearly buried a neighborhood in mud. I didn't celebrate. There was nothing to celebrate. 3 cabins destroyed, a valley scarred, lives disrupted. But there was justice. And for the first time in months, the ridge was quiet again. A week later, I stood on the edge of the slope. The rain had stopped. The air smelled like wet earth and pine. I ran my hand over the scarred soil, thinking about everything that had happened. Karen had believed she could control nature with paperwork and arrogance. But nature doesn't play by HOA rules. I guess that's the lesson I took from all of this. When you strip away the greed, the titles, the signatures, some things will always belong to the earth. And if you push too far, the ground pushes back.